Japanese philosopher Banana Yoshimoto once said, "There are many, many difficult times, God knows. If a person wants to stand on her own 2 feet, I recommend undertaking the care and feeding of something. It could be children or it could be houseplants, you know? By doing that, you come to understand your own limitations. That's where it starts." This is the Producers Lounge Podcast, the best podcast online for tips and tricks on producing great film, television, and web content. Welcome back for Season 2, Episode 20, hosted and produced by greaterandgrander.com. If you have any questions or suggestions as you listen, we'd love to hear from you. Let us know in the episode comments. On this week's episode, we're chatting with Stuart J. Levy, who has produced feature films and television shows, including Priest, Sailor Moon, and many others. We discuss effective communication, managing a major international entertainment and media company, and also some honest discussion about how he managed TokyoPop during its toughest times. Stu also hosts his own podcast, Left Brain vs. Right Brain, and I highly recommend you subscribe to it. On a personal note, this was great. Stu was so insightful, I could have kept talking with him for another 2 hours. Here now is my conversation with Stuart J. Levy.
No video is great because I don't have to turn on my LED light. So
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's getting darker here because in Berlin, the like early September is already like, you know, basically fall.
Yeah.
Summer's pretty much, definitely summer's done. Like, we don't get the Indian summer like in LA.
Oh, yeah.
It's like super hot right now in LA, right?
Oh, yeah, we're going through like a 90s and up heat wave right now, so it's pretty crazy.
All right, and I have a little glass of port wine now. If I just was in Portugal, I got some white port
nice.
and a little cheese because you had said, martini in one hand. So I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna have a glass of wine. And it's 9 p.m. here. So if that's okay, that's how I'll roll on this.
Totally fine. Yeah, that's great.
All right.
So you're living and operating TokyoPop completely out of Germany at this point, or do you still travel?
Oh, well, I definitely travel. I don't travel as much as before the pandemic, but frankly, it's less about the pandemic for me, and it's more about I had I had 2 kids, so during the pandemic.
Wow.
Yeah, my son, my firstborn, was born February 2020, so he was born like a month before the pandemic started. And then, my plan was to travel a lot less and to spend a lot of time with him because, as an older dad, I've come to appreciate that things in life are not only about work, and there are other things like family and loved ones. And so I never had a child, and so he was is my first, and so then the pandemic hit, and it was perfect for me because I didn't have any FOMO of not going to film festivals or missing out on this market or travel. I didn't have to make any excuses. I could just stay home with my son and really enjoy it. So I did that, and then earlier this year, my daughter was born. She's 5.5 months now. And so now we've got our hands full. I live in Berlin. I moved to Berlin. My wife is from here and spent the pandemic here, have traveled, been to LA, back to LA 3 times, been to Spain a couple times, was in Portugal, Austria. So even during the pandemic, we did a lot of family travel, wanted to expose my boy to the world, which I think is important. But business-wise, I'm personally virtual, but our company has still an office in Hamburg, and in the States, we now have a pure virtual operation.
Wow. That is fantastic. Like, can you tell me, like, how was that? Obviously, that's a big transition because I imagine you were I know you went to Comic-Con every year and went to multiple festivals. Like, how rigorous was that before 2020, before 2019?
Well, in the States, in LA, our office was pretty casual already, and we don't have tons of full-time people. We have a little bit under 10. And we already, because I had moved to Germany and was kind of managing the business, coming in town, going back, we were already using Zooms, doing weekly meetings. things like that. And so when we were already thinking before the pandemic about, do we really need an office? You know,
Hmm.
everybody's commuting in LA, spending a bunch of time on the road. That's
Hmm.
not fun, of course.
Yeah.
And because we were used to doing things on Zoom, I started to think, well, our landlord was about to jack up the rent. And that makes you consider, is that the smart way to go? Are there different ways to do it? And so I decided to, well, I wasn't sure, but I was thinking about shutting down the office, and the pandemic hit, and the lockdown made it an easy decision.
Hmm. So where did you grow up?
I was born and raised in LA,
Hmm.
local Angelino,
Hmm.
in the San Fernando Valley. Back when the valley was, I was talking to my friends about this because we're Gen Xers, and Gen X, of course, is the forgotten generation. You know, it's like the boomers, the millennials, the Gen Zers, but we're Gen Xers. And in our era growing up in the San Fernando Valley, that was when the movie Valley Girl came out, and the song from Frank Zappa, if you remember that song, Valley Girl, she's a Valley Girl. Do you ever hear that song?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, now I remember. Yeah.
So that was all kind of like in the early 80s. And at the time, the Valley, which is, you know, we were all in high school, junior high school, and it was kind of the place to be. It was very, you know, we grew up in a special time to be there. And I think,
Mhm.
like, now I would not want to raise my kids, frankly, in the US, which is one reason why we're here in Berlin
Yeah.
and even in LA. And but when we grew up in LA, I think it was a good place to grow up, frankly. I think there was a lot of exciting things happening, and education was still good. Uh, but now, I don't know. I don't have a positive view on the environment, the society right now in the States.
Yeah, the looming threat of a second civil war does kind of dampen things, doesn't it?
Yeah, and also I think, like, if you're raising your kids, you kind of need to send them to private school in the US, and
Mm.
that already means that there's a separation. They're What they're exposed to is limited, and I don't think that's a healthy thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
But on the other hand, sending your kids to public school, you really kind of, I mean, I just don't think anybody is super confident about the education that a kid will receive in US public schools nowadays. There's exceptions, of course, but generally.
Yeah. It's interesting because you say that because they're my sister and my brother-in-law, they're thinking about, like, oh, where do we send our kids to school? He he's 2. He's 2 years old, and they're
Okay,
already trying to make that
similar to my
decision.
boy.
Exactly. Yeah. So, um,
What are they going to do?
right now they're leaning towards, I think, private school. But
Right.
it's still a few years out. Um, so let
Yeah.
me ask you, when you were growing up in the valley, what was like the moment that you decided, oh, I really am passionate about entertainment or passionate about manga? Did one come before the other with you? Or
Yeah, manga and anime in particular, I was not that familiar with when I was younger. Than I first learned about actually anime
Mhm.
through a buddy in high school who was really into it and was collecting laser discs. But I personally didn't have an interest, and it was a little bit esoteric for me. And so I didn't dive into it or understand it, but I definitely wanted to be in entertainment. I think that was the case from when I was pretty young. I love music and I love film. And, I think growing up in the 80s, especially MTV, it's hard not to be attracted to that type of visual entertainment, and music being the soundtrack to sort of everybody's lives and pop culture. It was kind of the heyday, I think, of music, with, anyone from Michael Jackson to Madonna to, all of these huge bands and groups that world famous worldwide.
Mhm.
So entertainment was really attractive. Being in LA, I had opportunities, for instance, in high school, a buddy's parents, or his mother was the head of security at the Grammy Awards. So we got kind of backstage passes at the Grammys one year. So I went twice to the Grammys and also was really a pro at sneaking into a lot of events. So I was at these great after parties and concerts. And so as a high schooler, I was already really felt that there's no reason, I was already kind of hanging out with celebrities. So there wasn't a reason to not to think that that was out of reach or unachievable for some reason. And so it was natural for me to consider going that direction.
Oh, wow. Real quick,
Yeah.
I gotta say, like, it is a funny corollary because you say like sneaking into the Grammys and places around LA. I actually grew up in Stamford, Connecticut, and Stamford is just an hour outside of New York.
Sure.
And of course, like all the kids in the drama club at my school, like a rite of passage for them was to go into New York City, go to 30 Rockefeller, and sneak into Saturday Night Live on a Sunday afternoon and just sneak into the set.
Nice.
I'm
I
very
was a
well off by
leader
then.
at I was a leader at causing wreaking havoc. It was just one of those things that I loved to do when I was young, and I think producing to a certain degree
Mhm.
is about wreaking havoc. You
Interesting.
find a way. Yeah, you basically find a way to shake things up, and you find a way to push to have the impossible happen.
Mhm. Mhm.
Kind of an alchemy sort of thing. But to do that, you have to just cause chaos, and out of that chaos comes the light, basically. Um, that's how I look at it. And so for me, causing chaos and manipulating chaos, like, that alchemy was something that I feel was a skill set that I had since I was really young, kind of talking my way into things, out of things. I remember like when I was in even as young as 14, 15, I was so good at kind of charming my way into getting free fries with my burger at McDonald's, by just kind of like sweet talking whoever was working there. And because I was, didn't have the money and I wanted some fries.
Right.
Um, but it was always that kind of stuff. And I don't want to get into the extreme stories of all the trouble we caused. But we did. I mean, without going into like felony area, but misdemeanors, we were really good um at violating the law in the misdemeanor category, I should say.
So, so then how did you take that talent and then translate it into a success? Like, how did you create havoc in your early career that led to success?
I think I think that first, in my case, I mean, my case is unique in the sense that I didn't go through like kind of a traditional Hollywood path. I
Mhm.
wasn't working in the mailroom at William Morris and then, being an assistant for so and so well-known producer. And, it wasn't that type of a path. I went to law school and then went to Japan and basically kind of like jumped into somehow trying to make ends meet um, by combining Japan with entertainment, which at the time didn't really exist at all. So I was literally paving my own road, not even
Mhm.
really paving. It was more like kind of hacking the jungle to create a road, and and it was tons of fun, but it wasn't there was no money there. It was like kind of sleeping on the floor of your friend's office on a futon in Tokyo and, cobbling together things to make ends meet. But basically, I think that, at least for me, talking your way into things, like being able to communicate
Mhm. Mhm.
is probably the essence of it all.
Right.
And so whether you're using those communication skills to get something that you want or to persuade somebody or to just entertain people, all of those things. I find that even I've always loved to joke around in meetings and kind of keep, like, right when things are getting intense, sort of throw out a joke to kind of break up the tension.
Mm-hmm.
And I always like to have fun in work, and I feel like that's what we do as producers. We sort of, we're jugglers literally, and so we're kind of like the class clown, or those people that run in the middle of the street and intersections at the red light and kind of like juggle a bunch of bowling pins, and then when the light's about to turn green, go back to the side and hold out your hand for money. That's kind of what we do, right?
I've never thought about that. I've also never seen anyone juggle bowling pins in the middle of a side of an intersection, but I now.
You've seen people juggle, right, in the middle
Oh
of the
yeah, yeah.
intersection. Yeah, yeah.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if it's, I mean, bowling pins was just the first thing that popped up into my mind, but generally, I
Mhm.
kind of think that we're the class clown. We're entertaining people and
Mhm.
kind of trying to distract them from the fact that they're putting their money into basically smoke and mirrors, because we don't know for sure what's going to happen. Nobody knows. We can do everything we can to make what we believe is the best show ever,
Mhm.
and an audience may not embrace it.
Mhm.
It's a
Right.
it's a shot. There's no, we're not we're not going through a scientific method to discover a new patented technology, or we're not, you know, craftsmen creating this incredible table that we know there'll be a demand for. We're jugglers in the middle of an intersection, somehow smiling while we've got those bowling pins, or what, whatever they are, in the air, catching them and hoping somebody um, gives us money out of pity or glee, um, up the side of the road. And then what we do with that money is either going to turn into something successful for everyone, or it will have gone down the path of no return.
Absolutely.
That's the business.
Yeah. So let me ask, I often find like the specifics and the timeline are important with these. How long were you in Japan after you graduated law school before you landed your first deal?
I mean, I guess it depends. Again, because my career was not traditional.
Yeah.
I've been able to put bread on the table through publishing manga, which
Right.
is not producing films. Some of the people that I respect tons and consider mentors in the PGA are, Hawk Koch and Gail Ann Hurd, and you know Marshall and people like that, Mark Gordon, that have I've learned so much from. But those are people that make TV shows and movies throughout their whole career.
Mm-hmm.
Me, I publish a lot of comic books, mainly manga.
Mm-hmm.
I have produced and actually have a new deal um, that will be starting very soon to produce a bunch of anime. So lately, at least for me, animation is becoming more relevant than live action.
Mm-hmm.
Not that there won't be live action still in the future, because genre entertainment and comic books and Japanese anime and manga, they all blend together, especially nowadays. Um, but so my first deal, back to your question,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess I would consider when I raised my first seed round for TokyoPop to be my first deal.
Mm-hmm.
So I raised money for my company, which was the vision of bringing manga to Hollywood, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And I raised, a small amount of money back in the day. It wasn't a lot of money. It was, you know, my very, very first deal was like $500,000. Oh, and even before that, actually, now that you mention it,
Mm-hmm.
probably my first deal, and it was very, very tiny. I was producing um, multimedia, so CD-ROMs before there was the internet, and
Oh, I
almost,
remember the
yeah,
CD-ROMs.
CD-ROMs, put them in your computer, and I was making what they called the edutainment, which was children's games that also taught stuff. So kind of like educational CD-ROM titles and I was doing that in Japan. I was licensing already made titles from the US and translating them, and I was also creating some original stuff. And a guy that I knew in Japan, an American who was living there, actually invested like 40 grand in my first couple titles. And I used that money and made the titles, was able to sell them to JVC at the time, and then took that money and kind of kept rolling it. And he allowed me to keep kind of reinvesting it until it finally turned into seed money for TokyoPop to bring manga to the United States. And that was different than CD-ROMs, but it it was something that I learned about and fell in love with when I was in Japan.
Wow. That is really cool. And then from that you were able to build up, and with TokyoPop in the US, build up a lot of licensing deals with major players.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a long and winding road. It
Mhm,
wasn't like, oh, we've, opened up our office, we've set up shop, and now we're doing deals with Warner and Disney and all the top Japanese companies. I mean, it was a hustle. It was hard.
mhm,
And at the time, Japanese entertainment, I remember multiple meetings where I would go in and say, yeah, we have this these great stories from Japan. The people didn't know what manga was. They didn't even really know what anime was yet.
mhm.
And I would go into the door, go into the office, and I would say, yeah, we got these great stories from Japan. And their general reaction was, why would we need anything from Japan? We've got plenty of amazing stories here in the US from Hollywood.
Mhm.
We don't need this. Um, I remember, I mean, actually kind of rewinding a little bit,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the first the first gig that I had that was actually in LA, that was a side consulting gig, and I was in my early 20s. To people who did understand it and were looking for it, was for Saban's company. And I was consulting for a great development exec named Corey Stern,
Mhm.
and she taught me a lot. The general counsel, their Bill Josie, taught me tons. He became a mentor of mine and ultimately ended up being my general counsel for a number of years. But those guys, that was kind of the first real Hollywood company, because they were super hot at the time. They had done this merger with the Family Channel, and Saban had gotten tons of money from Murdoch and ultimately became a billionaire when he sold it. But at
Home
the
of the Power
time,
Rangers too. Yeah.
yeah, Power Rangers is what made him all the money. But he took the Power Rangers, and then he was able to leverage that into a deal to basically take over a cable channel when cable channels were the best and most lucrative game in town.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, and what he did was he was able to, well, first he took Power Rangers, which was the number one, ended up being the number one hit on Fox, which was this new television network at the time. Was
Mhm.
way before like a Fox News and all of that. Don't I know you think of Fox and that's the first thing everybody thinks about nowadays, but like way back then there was no Fox News, there wasn't even CNN. There was there were the three networks, and Fox became the fourth broadcast network.
Mhm.
And they were struggling, but one of the first things that they were successful at was children's television, and Power Rangers was their showcase. And it was kind of a random show that got picked up by the woman who ran Fox at the time, who I think her name was, I didn't know her, but I think it's Margaret Letcher. I believe, I could have that wrong. But anyways, the story goes that Haim sold her Power Rangers, and then Power Rangers became such a big hit. He ended up kind of really anchoring most of the children's block, and then that became the most lucrative part of Fox's television business. And
Mhm.
then he used the relationship that he had built with Rupert Murdoch to then end up acquiring the Family Channel.
Mhm. Mhm.
And the Family Channel was really just a religious channel at the time. Um,
Yeah.
I forgot the name of the guy that had owned it. There was like this famous um, evangelist, kind of a preacher that had owned it. That's well known, but he had bought it from them, with
Pat
Murdoch's
Robertson.
money. Pat Robertson, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Good, Tucci. Um, and then they turned that into Fox Family, and Saban owned, I believe, half of it, but he had a put, so he could sell at a certain time, and he did, and that turned him into a billionaire. So it was not Power. I mean, Power Rangers made him a good amount of money, but it wasn't that made him a billionaire. It was taking that and deploying, um, really the success of that and his relationships into really full media mogul moves, I would say. So, anyways, Saban, this is before he had sold, but they were just starting to acquire Family Channel, but he was doing very well. And they had a big office in Westwood at kind of the top couple floors of one of those high rises. And I remember going in there as a young, early 20s aspiring producer. And my job was to tell them what was hot in Japan. And so I would watch these shows on video cassettes that I would rent at the local Japanese market in Northridge, where I was living. And then I would drive into Westwood once a week. I would say, hey, here's some shows that were hot. And I introduced them at the very, very beginning to Pokemon and a number of things. And they passed on pretty much everything because at that point they weren't really taking too many risks. But it taught me a lot. And that was my first kind of taste with Hollywood, I would say.
Huh. And what did you learn most from that experience?
It's a good question. I learned that even the most successful people
Mm-hmm.
still didn't really know what was going to hit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that whole concept of sort of like no one knows anything, that I learned that because I thought, wow, here are these people that are, at least from what I could see at the time, and I think back then it was true, at the top of their game. They were one of the ones at the top part of the pyramid in Hollywood. Sure, it was mainly kid stuff, but it was still, they're very successful financially, and they had the leverage with this big television network. Um, but they passed on so many things that had such potential. And to me, it was super obvious. Like, how can you not pick up this show? Like, this is so cool. But they didn't get it. And like Iron Chef was one of them. Like, this is in Japan, it's primetime television. It's a full drama. It's they really use the set pieces to show food, and people get excited. They turn food into sports, and everybody eats, and everybody likes game shows. This is great. What let's do this as the first producers ever to do this in America. And they're like, there's no way anybody in America will ever watch a show about food, is what they said. So it's
And now Iron Chef is a major U.S. reality show franchise. So
well, yeah, and then ultimately, then of course, their Food Channel came out and all the celebrity chefs, because this is before all of that. So
okay.
what they were doing in Japan with Iron Chef was before a celebrity chef even existed. The concept of a celebrity chef didn't exist in the Western world at the time.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah,
So then at this point though, by now you've going forward, you've raised your seed round on TokyoPop. You're starting to bring in stuff into the market, and I think one of your big early hits was Sailor Moon, right?
that's right.
Um,
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
and then also as far as like the stuff that you've also developed from an anime perspective and producing television at that time, you did Saint-Tail, Vampire Princess Miyu, Great Teacher, Initial D First Stage. Were these already animated properties and you were distributing in the US, or were you pushing
Pretty
them
much.
forward? Mm-hmm.
I mean, most of what I've done in my career, even though I've had some storytelling of my own,
Mm-hmm.
but most of what I did from a business point of view was licensed Japanese content or content from other places, mainly in Asia, and then localize those into the US. So, for
Mm-hmm.
instance, if you think of this kind of K-pop boom and what we've seen at the Oscars with Parasite winning and
Mm-hmm.
Squid Game and this kind of stuff, all of that stuff from Korea, we also did a lot of Korean stuff early on, and the people that run the company that did a lot of that product, CJ, were my friends for a very long time. And so these waves kind of from Japan with anime and manga, from Korea with K-pop and dramas, these were all things that um, I was in the thick of very, very early on. And it wasn't lucrative at the time. There was, it wasn't, we were trying to figure out how to make money from it, but we thought the product was really, really cool and edgy and different, and that Americans would love it if it was presented in the right way. But it was obstacle after obstacle. I remember things like the famous word was like niche. Like everything was like, oh, it's too niche. Oh, that's way niche. Everything was always niche. It was like, oh, no, we can't get involved in that business because it's too niche. Yeah, then I think it's ironic that ultimately that stuff that was so niche and ends up being basically the number one show on Netflix in the end, because what is niche at the end? The niche and mass are like they're irrelevant terms in today's world. It's more about what you know the I think the elements of the human experience and how anybody anywhere in the world can relate to a story if it's told in an interesting and engaging enough way. So accessing content, even if it's foreign language content or with people who have a different skin color than your own, that's not a hurdle to an audience. But the gatekeepers who back then would distribute DVDs or video cassettes or choose what would be on television or cable, those gatekeepers thought it was too risky. They didn't want to be the ones to take the chance that, well, why will this white person watch something that has mainly black people or Asian people, or have to, you know, watch this weird animated thing because cartoons are for kids. Why would an adult watch a cartoon? This is too violent. All those stereotypes that they had in their minds, they just couldn't, those were the obstacles that they couldn't accept that they might be wrong.
And it's funny you say that because this exact topic has come up with a lot of other guests in terms of like um, filmmakers of color, actors of color. Why
Hmm.
would somebody who's white appreciate their talent because they look different? And if you think about it, it's really mentality that is stemming from like the black exploitation film of the 70s, where each group had to have its own uh narrow focus of genre, and in theory nobody else would be interested in watching that. And when in reality anime had a huge boom, particularly like I remember going to college and going to my friend Cooper's dorm room and watching anime films with them.
Yeah.
It's kind of ridiculous and narrow. um,
Yeah. I mean, I think that
mhm,
it's really hard to understand kind of, but the Saban example is a little bit of a hint.
mhm,
And of course, I saw it over the years so many times, whether it was at CAA
mhm,
or, Warner Brothers or whichever sort of big company in Hollywood, also in the publishing industry too. It wasn't just Hollywood, Random House. There were other companies that I had talked to over the
mhm,
years. Um, and I think it's that the people who work for those companies, first, they're not taking any risk with their own money or their own lives. They're not entrepreneurs.
mhm,
Now, Haim Saban is different. Haim Saban's an entrepreneur. Obviously, Rupert Murdoch is an entrepreneur. Those people are taking risks. I think those people have a very different view. But all the people working for them,
mhm.
they're hired hands.
Right.
They have a salary, they take it, they feed their family with that salary. And the last thing they want to do is be fired, you
Mhm,
know?
mhm,
And depending on the company, a lot of these companies are pretty cutthroat.
mhm,
And if you do something and you stand out because you took a big risk and it failed, you're out the door. So I think what that does is that promulgates status quo and safety and security and lack of risk taking in general.
mm, okay.
I think ultimately it's that resistance to risk that
Mm-hmm.
every middle manager, every individual employee at those big companies has, that had created all these borders or all these walls over the years, and nobody had the power and the motivation to sort of shake the walls enough to knock them down. And
Mm-hmm.
so people like me would come along and kind of like tap a little on the wall, but the wall was way too strong to fall or have a dent in it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think ultimately, because of technology and the types of people behind places like Netflix, I give Netflix tons of credit because I think that Ted Sarandos and Reed Hastings' mentality has been take risks, and they've allowed their people and encouraged their people to take risks. I mean, I'm not a Netflix employee. I've never really been an insider there, but that's my understanding of what I see. I know that they've got a lot of, they're a tough company to work for, is also my understanding. But I think they really encourage risk taking, and that clearly has shown itself in the type of content that they've brought to the world. And I think how Netflix has succeeded with that type of content has ultimately brought those walls down throughout the rest of Hollywood.
Okay. That's that's really interesting because I keep trying to I have friends outside the entertainment industry and they wonder, how do you describe a producer? And I always say like producers are serial entrepreneurs. We take risks. We're constantly trying to start a new enterprise. Every film, every TV show is its own enterprise and just trying to push the boundaries in that way. And
Yeah.
that actually goes to my next question, which is you were an entrepreneur. You are an entrepreneur. Um, you pushed boundaries, you took risks, and you were able to build up a successful media company. And like I actually remember, I never told you this, but I actually came in for a job interview at TokyoPop back in
Do you really?
2007.
Oh, I
Yeah,
didn't.
yeah.
But you didn't interview with me, did you?
No, I interviewed with someone. I it was this was 15 years ago, but I think his name was Richard, and he had glasses. But you guys had really like you were a successful office, like up in the Variety building. How did you how do you run a large company like that, and how do you balance the left brain and the right brain in terms of business and creative risk?
Well, first of all, I've had ups and downs, and so has Tokyo Pop. So we're not in that building anymore. We're smaller. I mean, we're on our way up again, and we're doing well. Knock on wood. We've got about not that employee count is the thing to measure whether or not someone is successful in their business, because I think there's a lot of ways you can work now without focusing on full-time employees. It's very risky to have full-time employees, but we have about 30 people now um, globally, and so and we're growing. But back at our peak, back in the times you're talking about, we were more like around close to 100, I think, maybe even a little more. And for me, it was a big company. I look at companies that have like 5,000 people or 20,000 people, and I just can't even imagine it. It's just so hard to even 100 for me is too many. I like a small team,
Mm-hmm.
and it's challenging because when you need people to get work done, but at the same time managing all those people means any one person can only manage what they say up to 10 people.
Mm.
And so you then have to have people that you manage that manage other people, and ultimately keeping the quality, making sure that there's not waste, making sure people are focused and on the same page, and the vision is consistent is super hard.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's one of the hardest things about being an entrepreneur. And I think it's the same for, frankly, as a producer for a show, a film, or a television show, because we've all seen it. We look at a movie, for instance. Why was, I don't know, DC, not to pick on DC Comics, but there's so many DC Comics movies that we know are just really not not engaging entertainment compared to Marvel movies in general. There's exceptions.
Mm-hmm.
And you think, well, why? There's smart people working on the project. They're clearly experienced. They know what they're doing. But ultimately, I think it's really, really hard to manage a team. And those teams, you got a crew of what, 300 on a project like that, more maybe if you count all the visual effects,
Mm,
and trying to keep one vision, keeping the executives on board, making sure the studio's happy. The producers who are handling that stuff, they're really, really struggling. And they just that's not the type of job that can be executed very easily. So when people say, "How could they mess up that movie? It was so obvious."
mhm.
Um, I have a lot of sympathy because I know that the producers who made those movies were trying their best, you know. But
Yeah.
just like with business, there's ups and downs. You you can't always keep things on the tracks going in the right direction. You do everything you can, and ultimately, a lot of the times, the train will end up off the tracks. And you just do the best you can.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned that TokyoPop had gone through some hard times.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, and I'm not bullshitting you when I say this. Like, I think you deserve a lot of credit because you took a company that was really floundering because of the rights, from what I understand, the digital rights from a lot of your Japanese licensors, licensees, you didn't have those rights. And so when piracy crept
That's
in,
true.
yeah, you really got beaten up by it. And a lot of people, and I know quite a few people who, at that point, when the company was down at that point, they could have said, you know what? I'm done. I'm going to work for an olive oil company, something more stable. And you stuck with it. You brought Pop back from the ashes, and you have 30 employees now around the world. Um, how
Yeah,
did you?
and we've got some great stuff. I think we're going to grow more. I'm really, really bullish about the next few years. This new anime project that I mentioned to you, we've got a great financier who's very, very motivated to be serious about making anime, which means that we're not only making manga, we're also making anime. I think our intellectual property library is going to get stronger.
Mhm,
I think there's some really exciting times in the next few years, but not to sound too much like a corporate PR person, that just um, because of a few things. One, because really at the end of the day,
mhm,
any entrepreneur, what an entrepreneur needs
mhm,
is the right people. And getting the right people is very challenging. But I've been this time around after Tokyo Pop was really kind of at its low point and then kind of rebuilding it over time. I did take a few years to really sort of think about things, lick my wounds, kind of understand where I wanted to go, enjoy life a bit, take a breather. So I did all of that stuff back, especially in the PGA times when I was the most active in the PGA. Well, Tokyo Pop is still doing very well, kind of when I started the PGA, but then I went through a lot of challenges, and that's when I ended up being even more and more active in PGA because I had more time to do that.
mhm,
Um, but ultimately, I decided to put more effort into the company and rebuild it. But it's not even then. It was there were challenges trying to understand and create the right direction, and I still struggle with that sometimes. To be honest, is what is Tokyo Pop's role in the next few years compared to what it was back then? Back then, it was a clean slate in general. Anime and manga were not known. Our goal was to get anime and manga, in particular, into the homes, into the to the people. Manga in every backpack was one of our quotes, that we talked about. So that was a very easy mission to understand because of all the walls that were up.
mhm,
But now everybody knows anime, manga is like the hottest area in publishing industry. There's companies that are much bigger than us and more corporate. So what is our role? And that's something that we're learning, but I think we're very much about um, being the progressive company, being the company that tries things that nobody's tried, that supports the voice that's been unheard. We have always been that way, but I think we focus on that even more now than ever because first we can,
mhm.
nobody, we're not corporate. We can do what we want. And second, because the other companies don't have the ability to do that. We're the ones really, if we don't do it, nobody will, is our view. So those are the kinds of things we're focusing on. But back to your original question, um, I think ultimately, as an entrepreneur, there's two types of
Mhm.
entrepreneur, I should say. One type is the type that loves to start something, sell it, start a new thing, sell it again, and kind of like what they call the serial entrepreneur,
Yeah.
multiple times.
Mhm, mhm,
Then there's the second type, which is more like me, which is it's like your life work. You know,
mhm.
you're doing this thing for your entire life, even if it ultimately kills you. And I think that's really me. Like TokyoPop is the living, breathing being that has somehow eaten me alive and digested me. Um, and I've become, it's like a gun, it's like my Gundam, I'm like or more like a Megillion, I should say. I'm more like kind of attached to it. And it's my soul, and I think I am its soul. And so we're kind of a sentient being together, and symbiotic, I should say, really. And that is why I couldn't walk away from it, because it's there's just, I believe even now, and I believed when we were at our low point, that our mission was still valid, that what we could be, what we're trying to be, what the brand represents,
Mhm.
the content that still has not been brought to market, all of those things were as valid, even if the mission was not exactly the same because the walls are now down instead of up. The 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 playbook, the menu, the dream, all of those things were very much still alive. The media landscape has shifted so much, and obviously with this kind of major shift to digital, which has been happening for years and years and years, but has finally kind of like taken root to the point where it's truly disrupted most parts of the industry overall. Books are a little bit slower on that side,
Mhm.
and it's happening, but it's happening in kind of like slow motion. And so you see in Japan, finally digital is has eclipsed print in terms of its medium. Um, and so manga, for instance, in Japan is 60 to 70% digital now, the manga industry. In the
Mhm.
US, that's still somewhere between 5 to 15%, depending on kind of like the particular time. Pandemic, it went up to like 20%. Um, every now and then we get a title that's like 40 to 50%. So like almost as many digital sales as print sales, but it's very, very unusual. It is starting to occur more and more. So I believe, especially with new platforms that have been coming out like Webtoon and um, these streaming platforms for your phone, that comics and manga and all the related graphic novel type content will become more and more digital and more ubiquitous as it does. But that's something I've believed now for many, many years, and it's taken a long time to even get to where it is now. However, I think that will accelerate, basically.
Excellent. So what are some of the specific film and TV stuff that for you and for Tokyo Pop that you're looking forward to? I see on IMDb Pro you've got a lot of stuff in active development.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, those projects that are on IMDb Pro are old. I think they're,
Oh, okay.
yeah, we went, we've got an IP library, and we've packaged some of the stuff, but we haven't got it made yet. And right now, because the next phase, there'll be this shift towards making anime. Um, the live action adaptations will not be our focus. Now, it doesn't mean that that won't happen. There's always this type of discussion, and there's always these opportunities. And um, depending on the particular time, there could be a show set up here or there. But in general, as a company, we're very, very focused on the manga publishing that we're doing, and this next phase, the anime opportunity that we have, that will be announced in a few months. That will be our next phase of focus, and that will be the primary film television emphasis in the beginning. And then a few years down the line, depending on how that does and depending on what happens with the industry, I think we'll be in a really interesting position to be able to have a wider range of formats and content types if we want.
So my last question, if you could go back to your young self when you were growing up in the Valley, committing misdemeanors, what advice would you give yourself?
Yeah, that's a famous question, and I don't think I've ever been asked that. So thank you for asking me that. I've never really thought about what the answer would be, so I'll have to wing it. Not that I haven't winged it throughout this entire interview, but I think that I don't know that I would have any advice for my younger self. I think if anything, I would just kind of bite my lip and shut up, because I feel like when you're young and you hear advice, it kind of comes in one ear and goes out the other ear anyways. And so the people that affected me the most when I grew up were not the people that gave me advice necessarily, because I was too young to appreciate that advice. I think there were people that sort of inspired me just by who they were. And so maybe if there was a way for that younger self to sort of see me now and take a look at my strengths and weaknesses, my sort of ups and downs and all of that, there would be some kind of hint or some type of learning process that my younger self would gain from that. But I don't think me saying to my younger self, hey, watch out for this or do that, or, I don't think that my younger self would listen at all.
And that is Season 2, Episode 20 of the Producers Lounge podcast. Thank you to my guest, Stuart J. Levy, for joining us. You can find out more about him by checking out the show notes and visiting our website at greaterandgrander.com. Our intro and outro music today was Shalom and Salam by Mark Saltman. Our episode still image is provided by Zing.com. You can stay up to date by following us on social media at the handle Greater Grander, all one word. Make sure to subscribe wherever fine podcasts are found, and also, if you like what we do, share this podcast with a friend who you think will enjoy it. Join us next week for more cocktails and questions, and until then, keep producing dreams.